Hello and welcome to Big Jeff's Football Insights on the Big Ten Huddle. We are presented and brought to you by FanDuel. I am your host, Big Jeff McMichael, and this was pre-recorded earlier on Thursday afternoon. As always, please like and forward the podcast for us. Also, subscribe to the Big Ten Huddle, where our goal is to provide comprehensive coverage of the Big Ten, including all Big Ten teams in an unbiased way. So heading into the last week of the season, a huge week again for the Big Ten, of course, as we pursue our third straight national title, one game away of doing it, of course, completing the movie ending for Kurt Cignetti and the Indiana Hoosiers. As most of you should know, hopefully, I live in Atlanta, a 1990 Indiana grad and a big fan of IU football, which has been mostly a bad existence, but been pretty glorious the last 2 years. Also an Ohio State football fan since the late 70s. So I'm looking at my two teams going potentially back-to-back with national championships, which, given one of them is Indiana, is truly insane. So I was at the Indiana-Oregon game in Atlanta. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, but I can assure you, talking to a few fans there, they're asking themselves, is this really real? Is this just a dream? Don't wake me up. They're truly just totally shocked that this is happening, which is really an awesome thing. So for the agenda for this week, really three topics. I'm actually going to talk about my bowl picks. You can see those on the screen here and kind of the results for the Big Ten from give my personal perspective. Second thing, special topics, just some general insights on some of the dynamics that we're currently seeing in college football. But then most importantly, a deep dive on the college football final game, preview between, of course, Indiana and Miami on Monday night. Unlike previous podcasts, I'm not creating an article on my website for this, so the podcast is going to do. So let's talk about bowl results so far. And for me, you can see the table there for those who are watching on screen here. For Big Jeff, I'm 10-4 overall. I did get the Indiana game right. I had IU winning by 10, covering the spread. Of course, Indiana won by 34, which is pretty amazing. Basically, the rows in green reflect the games that I chose right, and then the items in light tan are the ones I got wrong. The Big Ten overall is 10-5, 4-2 in the playoffs, and most importantly, they've finished 3-1 against the SEC. So the only loss was Michigan against Texas. And as a reminder, the SEC finished 4-9 overall. 2 of those 4 wins, though, were against themselves. So should we really count them? And for the third straight year, they won't even have a team in the title game. So it might mean more in the SEC, but their talking heads will probably argue the bowl games don't mean anything, which would be contradictory, right? Since the last I checked, when competitive teams get on the football field, they want to win badly. They are competitors after all. So I don't want to hear about bowl games don't matter. They should be taken a grain of salt. They don't mean everything. There are opt-outs, but usually the opt-outs apply to both teams. And like I said, for my picks, 10-4, which is great. In the regular season, I only went 30-30 against the FanDuel spread. And you can see in the table all the different FanDuel spreads, specific to the Oregon versus Indiana semifinal game. And I'm actually going to bring up a picture here. It's kind of cool. I know JR and Zach provided a real good summary of this, but I was there with my 2 boys. We were in about 10-yard line, row 30. So really good seats. We were actually technically in the Oregon section, quote, Oregon section. I would say that section was still half Indiana fans. So it's kind of cool. This is a picture of after the Big Ten Network, the desk that they had there, where they had Kurt Cignetti come and talk after the game. Well, this is a picture of my son. He's wearing the same sweatshirt I'm wearing currently since both my boys are Ohio State fans, and I had to give them Indiana gear to wear. This is the first time they ever wore Indiana gear, and they did cheer for the Hoosiers, so they had a good time. But what was crazy, and you might have saw it if you watched the game, I would say it was 90% Indiana fans and 10% Oregon, a true sea of red. It was almost like the Georgia Bulldogs, were playing in Atlanta. So, and if you walked around downtown Atlanta, we did park and walk around. And again, it was just Indiana fans. They had taken over the town. Truly impressive. And a lot of neutral commentators, your Josh Pates of the world and everything, really complimented Indiana fans, really were taken by surprise a little bit about the passion of the Indiana fans. So just very cool to see. I just think the Ducks fans, it's a long trip from Eugene, Oregon. I would imagine some of them went to the first round game against Texas Tech. And then the problem with the model here is to go to 2 or 3, long travel games is just very difficult. So I'm guessing Oregon fans probably save their money to, if assuming we'll go to the championship, then let's watch the championship game and hopefully see our team watching it. So just difficult to go across the country like that. So I really feel for the Oregon fans. And if you looked around, they really were in shock. So did feel bad about that. I'm a believer one play can make a huge difference in deciding outcomes of games. I, again, would have beat Indiana anyway with the fact that they didn't have 2 healthy running backs. For sure, that played a major role. But when Dante Moore threw that pick 6 to open the game, that really set the tone for the game. IU went into the game believing we're going to win the game, and that just made it even more, that belief even stronger. I personally, when I saw that, I was like, they're just not losing this game. And it felt preordained. Now, credit to Oregon. They came back and did have that long, impressive drive, right? I mean, tie the score 7-7. Mendoza and the Indiana offense hadn't even touched hadn't even ran a play 8 minutes into the game. But, once Dante Moore had that second turnover on their own 3-yard line, it was basically all over. Oregon's inability to stop the Indiana run game, that was an early indicator it was going to be a long night for the Ducks. Often run games, it takes a while to get the run game going, but really right out of the start, Indiana was able to run the ball. That was just a really bad and surprising to me. I thought Indiana would run the ball better later in the game, but they finished with 185 yards at 4.6 yards per carry. In the first meeting against Oregon, they held Indiana to 111 yards and 3 yards per carry. So just a huge difference there. And really, to beat Indiana, you have to contain the run game. And teams like Iowa, Penn State, and even Ohio State, all the 3 of those teams really did well in the run game against Indiana, and all were really one play away from potentially beating Indiana. I'm saying that not as a dig at Indiana, but just to show if you can contain that game, and that's something Miami is going to look to do, that is the path for you to try to beat Indiana. Just some other thoughts on what we have seen, just specific to Oregon. I do think Oregon is better than that game. Sometimes once the game gets away from you, when the players know it, it's just hard to keep up that same intensity. I've seen that across all levels of football and other sports. The running back injuries, again, referenced that earlier, just too much to overcome. I mean, those are super talented backs that Oregon had. And then, their schedule, similar to Ohio State, was really not the toughest. So really, they were maybe not as battle-tested as they could be. But it is 3 years in a row now for Dan Lanning now to end the season with a very frustrating loss. 3 years ago, it was losing in a very tight game in the final Pac-12 title game to arch rival Washington. Last year, of course, the blowout to Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. That game was 34-0 Ohio State midway through the second quarter, even though it turned out to be like a 21-point win, which was somewhat deceptive. In this game, they lose to Indiana by 34, but they were down 35-7 at halftime. So the last 2 years, embarrassing blowouts. I don't think at all that Lanning is overrated in any way. You might hear some saying that. I don't think Ducks fans believe that or should be worried. Bad things can happen even to good teams and good coaches. Ryan Day supposedly couldn't win big games or beat Michigan, and then all of a sudden he did. And I think it will happen for Oregon and Lanning. Dante Moore coming back, which was just announced, a day or two ago. I think very good chance Oregon might open next season with the number 1 ranking. So Oregon fans, take heart. You have a great future ahead of you. Ohio State, just want to talk to them just because it has relevance to, who's the best conference, SEC or Big Ten, and who has the best teams in the nation really dictates that. So, when Ohio State lost Indiana in the Big Ten championship and then the Miami in the quarterfinals, many wondered how good is Ohio State? Were they really way overrated? And then their schedule, did turn out not to be as difficult. Texas was number 1 at the time. Ohio State beat them. Definitely were good, but not a great team. Penn State, I think they started number 3. We all know what happened to them. But now that we have, the only 2 teams Ohio State lost to are playing in the national championship. Indiana and Miami were their only 2 losses. They're both playing. Doesn't that sound familiar? Amazingly, that's exactly what Indiana could say last year, of course. They lost at Ohio State late in the regular season, and then against Notre Dame in the first round playoff game, they lost. So pretty wild that 2 years in a row for 2 teams like that to be very good, but, lose to the 2 teams that are in the championship game. I think Indiana and Miami, along with Texas Tech also, are the 3 best defensive lines in college football. And really, when you look at Ohio State, awesome team, but the main reason they didn't repeat as champs, in addition to how hard it is to do that and keeping your motivation as strong, but they had an offensive line that was very young, and frankly, it was just a little better than average, and you saw that. It showed in their lack of a consistent run game. In Miami and Indiana with those strong defensive fronts, that's a bad matchup for Ohio State. And yet they still were in position to win those games. Ohio State lost the 3 by Indiana, missed 30-yard field goal with less than 3 minutes left. That would have tied the game. But make no mistake, Indiana was the better team. They deserved to win. But, Ohio State held Indiana to a season low 13 points in that game. It's kind of wild. Indiana, other than that game, credit to them, their second lowest scoring output for Indiana beyond Ohio State was 20 points to Iowa. And then their third lowest scoring output was 27 to Old Dominion in the opener. So Indiana's just been very consistent in putting up points. And then, just Ohio State, the other thing just to say, against Miami, down 7-0, driving, completed a long pass to Jeremiah Smith, and then Julian Sand threw that pick 6 that really was not just a 7-point swing, it was a 10-point swing. So instead of being down 14-0, they really would have been down 7-3. I really think Ohio State, good chance they win that game if they don't throw that pick 6, but they did. And, Miami deserved to win the game for sure. So Ohio State fans are disappointed, but ultimately I think that offensive line just wasn't good enough. They weren't national title worthy, but it was a young offensive line, and I think all of them are returning except for the right guard, who was a weakness, Tegris Ebola. So I point all that out to say that for the Big Ten to be able to say we probably have 3 of the best 4 teams in the nation. Certainly Indiana is one of the best 2. We'll find out if it's the best. Ohio State, I think, is, 3rd, 4th at the worst. In Oregon, you could make a case maybe between them and, I don't know, Georgia, I suppose. But having 3 of the top 4 teams really speaks to, combined with that strong bowl record that we talked about, the Big Ten is the best conference in college football right now. So, and then, other general thoughts. One thing I was wrong on, if Indiana truly ends up winning the title game, I had said that only the teams with really top 10 like recruiting would likely be able to go through 3 straight games and have the depth you need to go through 3 or 4 straight games to win a national title. If Indiana wins, it definitely blows that up. And then Indiana will have truly broken the mold. They've already done it by making it to the championship game. But if they, win it all, I do think though Cignetti, they're in Indiana is a true outlier. I think it's hard to say, yeah, let's follow exactly what Indiana did under Cignetti. Much harder to do, but you will have people trying to duplicate that. Certainly they can follow the model to get better. I just don't know if they can emulate that exactly to win a national championship. So that was the first topic. Second topic, just talk to the dynamics of what's happening in the sport before we get into the title game. So, I think we all can agree that the current offseason, the portal activity has truly been insane. And I hate hyperbole, using a word insane. It's way overused. The word fits to describe this offseason here. We're really looking at annual player free agency. It's not good for college football, and it's not as good for the players as much as they think. Being in a program for 3 or 4 years where you graduate, that alumni base is loyal to those players. And, there's a lot of opportunities you can have for jobs after the fact because you did stay with that school and people can identify you. All those things are lost if you jump around the schools. But I get it. I'm not saying it's dumb necessarily by a player because you are going to make money. It's just, I don't know if it's the smartest move for everybody. But one thing to be clear, even though I don't think it's great for the game, it's not going to ruin the game because we just love it too much. We're all going to watch it no matter what. The second thing to say is I think there's no way things can stay the way they are now with rosters flipping so much. So I believe in 2 or 3 years, college football will identify and execute a system that does allow players to greatly benefit financially, allow some flexibility, but also put up some reasonable guardrails for teams to manage their rosters. It can't be annual free agency. So that could take the form of collective bargaining to make players similar to employees. And it could look something like enforceable contracts after you sign with a team. Maybe you get one transfer opportunity with no restrictions at all. But then the second time you transfer, I think there's going to be some type of restriction, whether it's sitting out a year. And so that will change the game a little bit. And I think that's why saying that recruiting no longer matters is an overstatement. Certainly recruiting has changed. I do think there's going to be some players still that want to sign with one school, stay there for 3 or 4 years, and then go pro, or and maybe transfer once. But those players are going to be the anchors for your program. I think recruiting is still important. It's just going to look different. As an example, maybe teams will target, let's bring in 15 quality guys versus 25. And that's going to give them more roster flexibility to do what Cignetti's done. Let's go after older players with more experience, proven production, and then supplement that with the younger players who will be the kind of the core and the anchors of the team. So, I think Indiana, even in Cignetti, he does want to recruit and have a mixture of both, but Indiana's not there yet in recruiting. They're still building those relationships, but you're seeing with this success, players now believing, hey, I don't have to sign with Alabama or Oregon or Ohio State to make it to the pros and get good coaching. I can sign with Indiana. So expect Indiana's recruiting to improve. And Cignetti, again, I don't think Cignetti's going with just we're only going to sign, in essence, the free agent experienced players. Certainly that's going to be a core part of his model. He wants strong recruiting as well. All right, let me get a drink of water. And let's talk about the game, college football championship. So FanDuel odds, we have Indiana as a 8.5 FanDuel favorite. They have the over-under at 48.5. Indiana, of course, seeking their first national championship in football. It's their first championship in basketball or football since 1987. I bring that up because I am an Indiana grad, 1990, but that was my freshman year. So that was the third and final championship for Bobby Knight, 39 years ago. Crazy. And that's when Keith Smart hit the jump shot to beat Syracuse. That older people will remember that game. So Indiana fans have been starved for something special to happen for really a long, long time. And that's why you're seeing this frenzy. And I'm expecting at this game, even though it's a home game for Miami, heck, I'm thinking 50-50, maybe even more Indiana fans than Miami fans. It's that rabid. Ticket prices worth, $3,500 minimum to get in. I think they're now below 3,000, but still an expensive ticket to get in for sure. Indiana ranked number 1, of course, currently 15-0, 26-2 under Curt Cignetti in his 2 years. Indiana would be the first team to go 16-0 in the modern football era. And really, if they win, they'd have to be considered one of the best teams all time. I think ultimately some of the things that dictate that is how well some of your players play at the NFL level. I think, when they look back at college teams, that you do that with Miami, that team had Ray Lewis and, players like that. And, or USC, and they name all the great players that USC used to have and that were playing in the NFL. So I think that's going to dictate things. But, third straight potential title. I think it is huge that a non-blue blood would be winning it. So Michigan and Ohio State were the last 2 winners. This would be the third different team. That's also very important. And like we said early, it would only cement even more if Indiana won it. That for sure, the Big Ten is the best currently. Miami comes in 13-2 overall as the 10th ranked team. They had to beat 3 teams to get here. Texas A&M 10-3 in the first round, beat Ohio State 24-14 in the quarterfinals, and then Ole Miss 31-27. So that's wins of 7 points, 10 points, and 4 points. 4 points against Ole Miss. Frankly, they should have beat Ole Miss by about 3 touchdowns. They dominated that game, but they made enough mistakes to keep them in there. But what the important thing is, Miami knows how to win close games. So ideally for Indiana, they don't go in that fourth quarter with it a 1-score game. SP plus stats, I do like to look at that. It's statistically based rankings. Indiana ranked number 1 overall. They have the number 2 ranked SP plus defense in the nation, only behind Ohio State. They have the number 2 offense for SP plus, only behind, no surprise, North Texas. Yes, North Texas, if you believe that, has the number 1 ranked offense per SP plus. So amazing balance for Indiana. Really shows how they don't have a glaring weakness as a team. Miami, number 9 overall in SP plus. They have the 6th ranked defense and the number 20 ranked offense. If you go by SP plus rating points, Indiana is 11.1 points better than Miami. So that's a little bit better than the 8.5 FanDuel point spread. Consider this. After Miami, who's ranked 10th in SP plus, the next highest rated ACC team, number 26, Louisville. It's crazy. Only one ACC team in the top 25. After Louisville, you have the ACC champion, Virginia, rated 31st. So, that conference weakness is one of the reasons Miami barely made the playoff field up until the last ranking. Remember, Notre Dame was ranked higher than Miami despite Miami beating them. And that really was a mistake by the committee, I feel, and really, really hurts the committee's credibility. But it's good that Miami ended up in here because clearly they're a good team peaking at the right time. And then just, helped by the game versus Notre Dame and their 3 playoff wins, Pro Football Focus has Miami with the 12th best strength of schedule in the nation. Indiana has the 27th best strength of schedule. So that's some of the background notes. Let's get into, I like to do this, reasons why Indiana can cover that FanDuel 8.5-point spread. I have 3 reasons here. We're going to go into it. Number one, for the most important position in sports, which is quarterback, Indiana's Fernando Mendoza is simply better and more consistent than Miami's Carson Beck, who would need to have, frankly, one of his best played games ever to likely match what Mendoza is going to do in this game. I was worried when Fernando Mendoza, won the Heisman Trophy with all its hype, responsibilities. I was worried that was a distraction for Indiana's playoff run and maybe caused him to lower his level of play. I know he sought out advice on how to not have that be a distraction, and whatever he did, it's worked because he's taken his Heisman level quarterback play to a whole nother level in the playoffs here. So in 2 playoff games versus Alabama and Oregon, he's achieved his 2 highest QBR ratings of the season, according to ESPN. So that's a 96.7 QBR versus Alabama, and then a season high 98.5 versus Oregon. So those 2 games combined, Mendoza, 31 of 36. That's 86% completion rate. 369 yards total, 8 touchdowns, no interceptions. Plus, he's run for 44 yards despite being sacked 4 times. And those sacks, as we know in college football, counts toward your run totals. I think Mendoza's running ability has been a big hidden weapon for him all season, and it's only continued in the playoffs. He's several times ran for a key first down on 3rd and long situations. It happened early in the game against Oregon for sure to extend a drive when Oregon was still in the game. Now, the passing yards have not been a lot, right? 184 yards average across those 2 playoff games. But Indiana's been so efficient in blowing out teams, there's been little need to throw much in the second half. So you can't blame Mendoza for that. I think the bigger thing in the playoffs for Mendoza is he's eliminated some of those key interceptions he threw in those earlier games that were big against Iowa, Oregon, and Penn State. He had a key interception that required Mendoza to lead some, key 4th quarter drives. And so no need for that. That's why Indiana has blown these teams out in the playoffs is that lack of turnovers, and Mendoza is an important part of that. Carson Beck has been very solid and steady in Miami's 3 playoff wins, but his average 3-game QBR is just 78. So that's 78 for him versus 90. What did I say? 90. Like 97 average for Mendoza in his 2 playoff games. So Beck's combined 3-game playoff stats, 56 for 83 passing. So it's, 67% completion percentage. Not bad. 509 yards. So that's 179 yards per game average. So he's actually averaging less than Mendoza. So both these quarterbacks aren't throwing for a lot of yards because they haven't had to. In those 4 games, 4 touchdowns only and 1 interception. That was versus Ole Miss in the semifinals. For those of you who have watched the games for Miami, Beck has made some throws that made you say, whoa, what was that, right? In some cases, they were potential interceptions that didn't happen. And in others, like early in the Ole Miss game, Malachi Toney was going down the middle of the field wide open for an early TD, and Beck just totally missed him. I mean, it was a complete missed opportunity. So Beck has been a mixed bag, and he doesn't have the consistency you'd expect from an experienced player. Just for the season, Mendoza's QBR, 90.2. Beck is 78.3. Both these quarterbacks, very experienced. Mendoza's 22 years old. Beck is 23, each with multiple years of experience. But it comes down to this. Who do you trust to play more efficiently and come up big in the clutch moments? Certainly it's Fernando Mendoza. So that's a big reason why I think Indiana can win and cover the 8.5. Number 2 reason to like Indiana. Indiana has a big edge in the ability to generate turnovers and win the turnover battle for extra possessions. Plus, they make way fewer mistakes and penalties, so they're likely to win the hidden yards battle. So and these are game-winning difference makers. So I highlighted this last week, and it showed in the Oregon game, that early pick six by D'Angelo Pons was huge. And after winning the battle against Oregon in turnovers, the turnover battle 3-0 against Oregon, Indiana is now first in college football in the FBS in turnover margin, plus 21. They were tied last week with Arizona, but now they've broken that tie. Incredibly, Indiana only 8 turnovers on the year. That's tied for third in the nation. Only one lost fumble. They've had 29 takeaways. That's third best in the nation. And they have 18 interceptions. Miami actually ranks pretty well in turnover margin. They're plus 11 on the year. So that's 10th in the nation, right? So very good. Plus 11. Way different than plus 28, though, right? 14 lost turnovers, 25 gained turnovers, 16 interceptions for the Canes. So good at generating turnovers. In the playoffs, Indiana is plus 4 in turnover margins with 0 turnovers. Miami is only plus 2 in one more game. That's 5 takeaways, but 3 turnovers, 1 in each game for Miami. So clearly Miami is more likely to have turnovers, which against Indiana's efficiency, that's kind of a death knell for Miami. They can't afford, really any more than 1. Looking at the hidden yards of penalties. So Indiana, 5th fewest in the nation with 3.7 penalties per game. Interestingly, that's only 3rd best in the Big Ten. So Iowa and Wisconsin actually have fewer penalties per game. Indiana, when you look at penalty yards per game, 2nd best in the nation. They average only 27 penalty yards per game. That's pretty incredible. Let's look at Miami, 84th in the nation at 56 penalty yards per game. So they give up 30 more yards per game than Indiana in penalties. And then Miami averages 7 penalties per game. That's 3.3 more than Indiana. So Miami tied for 103rd in the nation in number of penalties per game. But remember, it's not just the penalty yardage. Anytime you have like a pass interference or personal foul, that other team gets an automatic first down. So that's not often reflected in the pure penalty yardage. So this is a big potential advantage for Indiana. And again, Indiana much more likely to benefit from a key Miami penalty. Number 3 for Indiana, they're playing with absolute confidence that they can beat any team and that they're the best team in the nation. And they're led by maybe the best defense in the nation. So I said the same thing about Oregon as well. I was worried Indiana beating Ohio State, rat poison and everything. Everyone telling you how great they're, none of that. We've seen no impact on Indiana's focus and motivation. And that's a credit to Kurt Cignetti and his coaching staff, and also a factor of how older and experienced Indiana is across their starting positions. And now that we're down to the final game, the fact Indiana knows Miami beat Ohio State, who Indiana, barely beat by 3 points. Clearly Indiana's not, I don't think, going to overestimate. That'd be the only thing I can think of now is that Indiana's overconfident, but really they shouldn't look at this Miami team. Clearly they're playing really well. That'd be crazy if they overestimated them. And then I've been saying this, the key strength of the team, that Indiana defense, that's the anchor. Indiana 2nd in the nation, only to Ohio State in scoring defense. They average 11.1 points per game given up. Number 4 in total defense, yielding over 261 yards per game. And then this is most important. Indiana is best in the nation in run defense. And that's exactly an area where Miami needs to thrive, running the football, if they want to spring the upset. Let's see. Indiana gives up only 75 rushing yards per game. And then they're 7th in the nation, giving up 2.9 yards per carry. And then we talked about Indiana's held all teams but 2 to 15 points or less. So Oregon scored 20 and 22 versus Indiana in their 2 meetings. And then Penn State scored the most, which was 24 in their loss to Indiana. But I think, Miami's going to have to score 20 points against Indiana to have a chance here. All right, 2 reasons to like Miami. Number 1, Miami has the ability to run the ball behind Mark Fletcher and a really good offensive line to wear down Indiana defense, which is not deep, but they've mitigated that by generating so many turnovers. So, it was mentioned during the telecast. I listened to the telecast, having gone to the game, the recording of it, that Indiana mostly plays 13 guys on defense. They really don't rotate a lot. So if Miami can run the ball, limit Indiana possessions on offense, potentially the formula would be to wear down that Indiana defense with that really good offensive line, get to the fourth quarter, and that's where running games, when you're pounding the rock, really can pay dividends. That needs to be part of their game plan. Against Ole Miss, I did not understand. Miami was clearly, Ole Miss could not stop the run, but offensive coordinator Shannon Dawson just, outthinking himself, not sticking to the run, running trick plays when you just had an 8-yard gain up the middle. It just didn't make sense. So I think Dawson will have learned his lesson. You're not going to get cute versus Indiana and beat us with trick plays and beat Indiana with trick plays. So you're going to see a lot of Mark Fletcher pounding the rock for sure. And I mentioned how Indiana's run defense is really good at stopping the run as well there. So Miami's rushing offense, just specifically 72nd in the nation for the year, average 155 yards a game, 4.25 yards per carry. But really, that's deceptive because the team you are is how are you doing at the end of the year, right? The stats for the year can be deceiving. Miami is peaking at the right time behind Mark Fletcher, who is also peaking at the right time. He's really shined in the playoffs. Against Texas A&M, Fletcher, 17 carries, 172 yards. That's over 10 yards a carry. Ohio State, 19 carries for 90 yards, but 4.7 yards per carry. Still good, though. Still plenty good enough to beat the Buckeyes. And Ole Miss, 22 carries for 133 yards. That's 6 yards per carry. So that's excellent. And then Miami likes to use freshman wide receiver Malachi Toney kind of as an extension of the run game. They might run him some, but more importantly, they'll throw short passes to him. Those are like runs, and get him in space, have people miss. That's part of his 1,089 receiving yards. He also has 113 rush yards on the year. So I just think Toney is kind of a wild card in this game. He might be the most talented, pure, skill position player on the field in this game. And for Miami to spring the upset, they might need Toney to have some big plays for sure. But the rushing success, again, going to be hugely important for Miami. All right, second reason to like Miami, strong front sevens like Miami has on defense, they have been able to slow down Indiana's running game and make them more one-dimensional. So this is going to be the second key thing for Miami. So both these things are tied to, in the trenches for sure. I've thrown out this stat before. Indiana, when they faced talented and physical defensive front seven, that Big Ten leading rushing offense, they averaged 218 yards per game. That's 12th in the nation. They struggle more against those tough fronts. So in the 9 games against weaker rated defensive fronts, Indiana averages 285 rushing yards a game. That's 6.5 yards per carry. So I'm leaving off Oregon for now from the semifinal game. But if you exclude that game, Indiana averages 105 rushing yards a game, 2.9 yards per carry against their 5 toughest opponents who have good front sevens. That's Iowa, the first Oregon game. I'm including Penn State, Wisconsin, and Ohio State. Now, the caveat is Oregon was part of that group. In the second game against Oregon in the semifinals, they ran the ball really well. 185 yards at 4.6 yards per carry. So if Indiana has anything like that again against Miami, they're going to easily beat the Canes. It will be a double-digit win for sure. But Miami's defense is one of the best in the nation at stopping the run. They rank 6th in rushing defense. Only 86.5 yards per game they give up, and they only give up 2.95 yards per rush. That's 10th in the nation. So the similar defense to that that Indiana's face is Ohio State. And IU, again, had 118 yards rushing, 3.5 yards per carry against the Buckeyes. But, Messidor and Bain, the defensive ends on the line, projected first-round draft picks. Miami certainly has the personnel to contain the Indiana rushing attack. So what's Big Jeff's call on this? Just a few things. I think both these teams feel that they are a team of destiny, and both are very hungry to win a championship. So I think both are equally motivated. Plus, unlike Ohio State and Oregon, neither team has a offensive or defensive coordinator that's leaving for a head coaching position. That's a distraction where that person couldn't 100% focus on having a great game plan. Oregon had both their coordinators leaving. That is a factor. That wasn't a reason why Indiana won. But maybe Oregon would have played a better game. Health-wise, both are in good shape, so that shouldn't be a big difference. So really, given Indiana's efficiency, Miami cannot lose the turnover battle. Maybe they can afford one turnover, but I don't know even that. They probably need to come even, at least in turnovers, and play closer to how they did versus Ohio State. They had no penalties versus Ohio State, which is amazing and annoying to me as a Buckeye fan. It's an absolute must for Miami to contain the run game. I mentioned that. If Indiana runs even for like 140 yards, I think they win the football game. And then Mark Fletcher, of course, needs to have a big game, keep the ball out of Fernando Mendoza's hands. If they do that, Miami absolutely can cover and win this game. They for sure are good enough to do that. But, I'm wearing an Indiana sweatshirt, Indiana grad. How can I bet against Cignetti and the Hoosiers at this point? I do think Miami is going to make this a tough game with their excellent offensive and defensive lines in the trenches. In the end, though, Fernando Mendoza will be the difference. He's going to make more big plays for Indiana when they're there than Carson Beck will. And his running ability will also be a big difference maker, especially if Miami's getting a lot of pass rush, and you see Mendoza step up in the pocket. If there's a running game or lane, he's not afraid to take it and pick up good yards. He's a big guy. He can take a hit. And so I think that's going to be the key difference in the game, Fernando Mendoza. So I'm calling it Indiana 27, Miami 17 for the third straight Big Ten National Championship. Big Jeff, it will be football nirvana for me with back-to-back Ohio State and Indiana championships, of course. So that's it for this week. Follow me on X at Big Jeff's FT Ball. We thank you for listening, as always, to the great content at the Big Ten Huddle, and have a great rest of your week and weekend, everybody.